The following production is part of the Play Some Video Games podcast network.
Unbred, and welcome to Board with Video Games, the gaming podcast that strives for the right balance of coverage for games you play on your table and on your television. You can think of us as the Sam and Dean Winchester of gaming podcasts. We're a proud member of the PSVG Podcast Network and a member of the Make Us Better team over on Patreon. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle, and joining me on this co-op adventure, the only guy I want to hunt supernatural things with. Josh, how are you doing this evening?
I am doing well. Something I can get behind. I'm a big supernatural fan, so.
You are a big supernatural fan.
Sam or Dean. I don't think either of those would be bad.
Who would you prefer to be between Sam and Dean?
I'm more of a Dean, I think.
Oh,
personally.
Really? Now, you're going to judge me hardcore for this, but I always get confused by who is who, and do you know why?
I do know why? No, I don't know why.
Okay,
because... yes, I do know why. Gilmore Girls.
Yes, exactly. Because the person who plays Sam, his character on Gilmore Girls, is named Dean. Right. So he should have just been Dean and continued with the Dean thing, and that would have been way easier. I've actually never watched Supernatural.
Oh, it's so good. There's some bad episodes.
Well, I mean, any show like that's been on that long is going to have a bad episode here or there. Maybe even a bad season here or there. But everyone tells me I should watch it because I know everyone. But it's really intimidating to jump into a show that's on like season 14 or whatever they're on.
Yeah, there's a lot to digest, if that's the word I want to use.
So yeah, instead I watch much shorter things these days, but maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. Because why? This is a gaming podcast. It's not a television podcast. It's a gaming podcast. So thanks so much for joining us this week. As always, if you have any feedback, questions, suggested topics, hit us up at Board with VG on Twitter and on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/boardwithvg and use that hashtag boardwithvg on all the social media so we can follow all of the awesome, cool, wonderful things that you are playing. As always, we do have email as well. So if you want to send us something a little more long form, boardwithvg@gmail.com. And if you want to throw us $1 or $2 to help make us better, check out patreon.com/makeusbetter. And a big thanks to all the supporters out there. As you may have known recently, it was announced that a new Make Us Better Patreon goal was set at $400. And if we reached that, you would see all of the wonderful PSVG podcasts broken out into their separate feeds. And guess what? Because of you wonderful people, we have reached that goal.
Woo-hoo.
And I know I'm excited. Josh is excited. All the folks over at PSVG are very excited and very thankful to all of you for help literally making us better. So Josh and I have talked about it, and we'll take a little bit behind the scenes work as well. But we're hoping that our 1-year anniversary episode, so October 11th, the episode that releases that week, that is our goal as to when we will have things moved over to an individual podcast feed. No promises. We're not guaranteeing that, but that is the goal. And just know that that is in the works. And we thank you all so very much who have helped make that happen. Josh, do you have any thoughts on that? Any comments you'd like to say?
No. I mean, yeah. I mean, we've worked real hard, so to speak, at this, and something we're very passionate about. We're really happy with our fans, and especially the people contributing to us, Kyle and myself included, in that. But we're just excited to have our own feed, and I think this is going to be great for us and the listeners because we're going to get more exposure, at least easier, to the board game companies and the video game companies that we reach out to. It'll be a lot easier for them to find us. So I think only bigger and better things are to come. I'm excited.
Absolutely. And along with that, speaking of bigger and better things, Josh and I have talked, and after last week being episode 50, we decided that there was a few small tweaks we wanted to do to the show format moving forward to hopefully serve you, the listening audience, better. Some of these things have been conversations we've had with you, the listener. Some of them are things that just Josh and I have talked about, but we decided that moving forward, we're not going to be always covering everything we play each week. Now, there's a big reason for that. Number one, most of the professional people you listen to in the gaming world get all of their games provided free of charge. We are not lucky enough to be in that situation right now. So sometimes the glut of fall games, or games really at any point, it seems these days, starts to hurt our wallets a little bit. Between video games and since we cover board games as well, that's a lot of money leaving our pockets that we're getting to cover these games each week. So in order to help kind of balance that out for us a little bit, and in order to hopefully give more in-depth thoughts on the games we're playing, we're probably going to start alternating every other week, where one week we're going to talk about what we're playing. The next week we're going to talk about news for the last 2 weeks, and then we're going to kind of rotate back again and talk about the games that we're playing. Now, as always, most podcasts that you listen to about games are going to talk about news. So we don't want to just be one more gaming podcast that talks about that. So as is our tradition, anytime we talk about news, we're going to very briefly say what the story is, but then really we're going to go to in a much more in-depth conversation about what questions that story brings up. So it's not going to be just a rehash of what we think of that news or what we think that news necessarily means for the industry, because a lot of people do that. We're hopefully instead going to use that as a springboard for a topic of conversation in general, kind of related to that, to hopefully give you a different perspective or something different to think about. So we're looking to have more in-depth conversations, have a more conversational tone as we go through the podcast to hopefully make it a little more engaging for you, to help drive opinion or feedback. If we say something and you're like, wow, these dudes are off their rockers more than usual, I need to set them straight, you can hit us up on Twitter or on Instagram, or send us that long form email and tell us all the ways that we're wrong or right if you really feel that as well. Also, there's going to be a new short segment at the end of each show. You'll hear it this week for the first time. It's going to be very short, but we hope that you enjoy it. So I think that's enough of the housekeeping this week. We've definitely gone on a little longer than we usually have. And the first show with the new format is going to be this week. So Josh, what has been some of the hot board gaming news of the last 2 weeks, sir?
Okay, so following in the footsteps of Super Mario Level Up board game, I hesitate to say it with the exclamation or just say it as a sentence. USAopoly has announced Dragon Ball Z Power Up to the table as a board game with a board that looks, Kyle says pretty similar, I say identical to the Super Mario Level Up game. It's expected to launch this fall, and it does beg the question, does it only look similar because it has a stepped-up 3D board? Aren't all 2D flat game boards the same as well? And you can check them out. There's pictures on DicetowerNews.com. So Kyle, I kind of answered the question in my statement, but what do you think? Does it only look similar because it has a stepped up board, or do you think this is it's a fresh new take on a board game that is not related to Super Mario Level Up?
I mean, it is interesting, right? Because when you look at it, you say, man, that game is identical to Super Mario Level Up, right? Because Super Mario is the Level Up one. This is the Power Up one, right?
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Level Up.
Yeah. So when you look at the board, immediately my gut reaction was, this is the same game with a different skin. Now, I have no idea from a mechanism standpoint if it is, but that was my initial thought. But then I thought about it more and was like, well, I don't think about that for flat 2D boards. Like, the graphic design on the board is completely different. So why don't I think when I see a flat 2D board that it must be the same thing? But when I see this 3D board that is stepped, I immediately go to, oh, clearly this game is just a copycat of that thing. Is that a bad thing for me to think?
It's not, because while I said what I said, I haven't played Mario Level Up. So I can't say that the game mechanisms will be the same. So the game could be totally different, which would fall into the all 2D games are the same kind of category. However, not having played Mario Level Up, the game, it's not, if you think this or not, it doesn't make you bad. it just looks like the game is USAopoly. Okay. USAopoly is famous for making Beeropoly, Churchopoly, Bibleopoly, NASCARopoly, you name it, it has an opoly, right? That's seems to be what they're doing with this. And if they're making money, I mean, they're not going to stop doing that.
Right. But I guess if it is, say it is just the exact same thing reskinned, is that bad?
No, I mean, the Dragon Ball Z people don't have a game. There's probably a Dragon Ball Z Monopoly, but they...
Is there a Dragon Ball Z Monopoly?
There probably is. I don't know. Let me look it up.
Well, while you look it up, I'm going to ask you another question. So, is there, when you look at this stepped system then, these stepped 3D boards that they have, you know, the Mario one makes sense. You're running, you're jumping, you're doing all that stuff. The Dragon Ball one, I don't know how it's going to work. I'm also not familiar with Dragon Ball, so I'm sure maybe there is a very, very good tie-in there that I'm not aware of. But is there another game or another property that you think would fit well in this idea of a stepped-up 3D board, something where you're constantly climbing? Is there another game that you can imagine would fit well with this IP, or I shouldn't say IP, but this style of board game design?
Yes. First of all, there are 2 Dragon Ball Z Monopolies.
Really?
There's a Dragon Ball Z Monopoly and a Monopoly Junior.
Perfect.
There's also a Yahtzee Dragon Ball Z, just to cover those bases. Yeah, I think that Donkey Kong, classic Donkey Kong, would fit that formula perfectly. The ladder system. I'm trying to think of anything else, but right away, like Donkey Kong, it seems a perfect fit for that.
I agree. I'm actually surprised that they haven't gone with Donkey Kong for this, because it does seem like the very easy fit for this to happen. I think also potentially maybe a little bit different, but a Rampage game. Get a little Dwayne The Rock Johnson standee, you know, as he goes through.
Maybe original Rampage. I don't know that we need the new one.
I don't know. It's got The Rock, and I kind of like everything with The Rock, though granted I haven't seen this movie yet, so.
Yes, I do too. I enjoy Rock movies, but I don't know. Something about taking a classic movie, game that I love, and making a flying wolf really bums me out.
Okay, so we agree, though, that looking at this 3D board, it seems like it's a copy and paste. But why don't we feel that with 2D boards?
Because they're not identical. Just because they're flat. Like,
well, this is only
even Ticket to Ride changes what the board looks like.
Well, right, but the only reason it's identical is because you're comparing the 3D modeling of it, not the graphic design of like where the pieces or how the pieces move on the board. Like, from a 2D board, a flat 2D board, like they're all flat. You know, the graphic design and how you move on it's what's different. So isn't it theoretically possible that this game, even though it looks really similar, might be vastly different than the Super Mario one?
You're absolutely right. It could be vastly different. And my local Barnes & Noble has that Mario level up on the clearance shelf. So maybe I'll buy it. Maybe I will. Well, funds have been tight, and we had to settle with just getting the Splendor expansion. But there's definitely like 8 games I want to get on that clearance rack.
Yeah, no, I hear you. My Barnes & Nobles, if you aren't familiar, listeners, Barnes & Nobles are doing a clearance sale right now where they have many board games in their clearance section right now for 50% off. I got New York 1901, but they had a great selection. First Martians was in there. Drop Mix was in there, which if you don't have yet, you should totally be getting in on the Drop Mix craze because that game is so fun. First Martian, I think I already said First Martians.
Ice Cool.
Yeah, Ice Cool was in there. Yeah, that was in there. The Big Book of Madness was in there. Like, there's a lot of really good games that were in that 50% off bin. Code Names was in there. So, Spyfall. There was a lot that was in there.
Spyfall 2, yeah. That was in there. Yeah, and in each of my Barnes & Nobles in the area, there's 3 of them in the area. They all have different selections, which is weird.
Yeah.
So I've been checking them out. They also, the 5 to 6 player expansion for Sagrada is now in stock at my Barnes & Nobles.
Interesting.
What we'll be getting on this Friday.
Now that you mentioned that, mine had it in stock as well, but not the base game.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they didn't have the base Sagrada game in, but they had the 5 to 6 player expansion for it. So I was like, well, I contemplated it, but then I was like, well, I don't even have the base game, so this is probably a bad idea.
Okay, let's move to the next story.
Sounds great.
The National Toy Hall of Fame has announced the 12 finalists for being inducted into the hall. Those finalists are American Girl dolls, Chalk, which is a toy, apparently, Chutes and Ladders, the Magic 8-Ball, Fisher-Price Corn Popper, which must be regional, Masters of the Universe, Pinball, Sled, also a toy, Tic-Tac-Toe, Tickle Me Elmo, Tudor Electric Football, and Uno. As always, it's an eclectic mix, but Kyle, if you had to vote for 3, which 3 are you voting for and why?
This is actually a really challenging thing because when you look at the history that they have and the things that are in there, like Ball is one of them. And it's like, well, that makes Stick is in the museum. Stick, which I should, or the Hall of Fame, I should say, which I guess makes sense, right? Like a stick is a toy that kids have used for a really long time. Like it makes sense. So when I look at this now, part of me was very sad because I didn't know what all of these things were. Mostly I should say I didn't know what Tudor Electric Football was. I had to look it up because I wasn't totally certain what it was.
You didn't know what that was?
No, I had no idea what it was.
Not what I think it is?
No, I think it probably is. As far as all the men on the field and it kind of vibrates and they move.
Yeah.
Yep, that's what it is. I didn't know that's what that was called. I just had never heard the name of it before. And I think it's interesting that He-Man is referred to as Masters of the Universe.
Well, that was the line. The line was Masters of the Universe.
Oh, but it's interesting because, well, I know that's like what, anyway.
The show was called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
Right.
But I think they did that so they could start putting in toys that weren't part of the show.
That would, I guess, which would make sense.
Yep.
So for me, the first one I would have to go ahead and vote for, and this might seem weird. I think the first one I would vote for is actually Sled. And the reason I'm going to vote for Sled is because as someone who grew up in Minnesota, I spent many, many wonderful winters sledding down hills. Like, it is one of my earliest memories is when I still lived in far northern Minnesota, and we moved from there when I was 4. And this is one of my earliest memories, is we would go to the library that was like kitty corner from my house, and they had a hill next to the library, and I would take my sled there, and I would slide down the hill. Like, that is one of my earliest memories. So for me, just from a pure nostalgia feeling from where I grew up, I would have to vote for Sled as one of my 3. Josh, what would you vote as your first of your 3?
Sled isn't a vehicle.
I mean, it's kind of a toy, like I said. I mean, if they can have Stick in there, like, you can have Sled, right?
No, you're right. I agree with you, and I shouldn't be able to define what a toy is over somebody else. There's a couple tight ones in here for me, but from how I grew up in my childhood, pinball would have to be my first pick. My uncle worked in coin-op, which is the business of, selling and maintaining pinball machines and arcade games. So a lot of my life grew up in arcades, around arcades, on the weekends going with my dad who helped my uncle, or my uncle fix machines. We also had about 30 pinball and arcade games in our basement that would be occasionally brought up into the house for parties and stuff. So pinball is big, and there's every year in a town close by to us, there's a pinball convention where you can just go, and they have a flea market area, like a con floor, if you will, and then they have a room of all free play pinball machines. And it's fun to see the generations of people there, from kids to grandparents, standing in front of a pinball machine playing for hours. So pinball, I would say I would put in my first choice.
Are you good at pinball?
It depends on the machine. I'm okay at pinball, but if you put me in front of a machine long enough, I can be good at pinball.
I've always enjoyed pinball, but I also always feel very, I don't feel very smart when I play, because I recognize that there is a game it's not just about, keep the ball up as long as you can with the flippers. Like, there are things you're supposed to try to hit in order that unlock certain things. Like, there's a progress to what you're trying to do. I am horrible at figuring out what that is supposed to be. Like,
it's not easy.
And I think that's why I like pinball, but I feel like I've never been good at it, because for whatever reason, the steps in the order of how you're supposed to do stuff is just something that never came to me.
That's the challenge, right? And every machine can typically be like so different. But if you're trying to do one thing, it's like you have the multiplier before you hit it through Slimer's mouth, before it goes through this, like all these different things. You got to do it in the right order for the maximum scoring.
Right. All right. So my second choice from these, I feel like you're gonna continue to ridicule me based off my second choice here, but we'll see what happens. My second choice is going to be Tic-Tac-Toe. It's a very simple game that I think all of us learned to play at it, or many of us learned to play at least at a very young age. And the reason I picked Tic-Tac-Toe, it's not a game that I necessarily played a ton, but I think it is just, there's a universally people have played Tic-Tac-Toe. They know what it is. They've had experience with it. And it can be played almost anywhere, right? Like you can have a piece of paper and a pencil or pen and you can play Tic-Tac-Toe. You can be at the beach with a stick or seashells and play Tic-Tac-Toe. You can be at a cabin and carve things into wood to play Tic-Tac-Toe. Like there's just universal, this is a game that can be played almost anywhere with almost anything. I still remember my grandparents had a magnetic Tic-Tac-Toe board that was a little one that was sitting in their living room that we would play with all the time. And if you watch the movie War Games, you realize that you can use Tic-Tac-Toe to teach people that war is bad. So really, Tic-Tac-Toe has so many uses to it, and it's so universal that to me, I feel like Tic-Tac-Toe would be my second vote as far as what should be inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame. What do you say about my second choice?
That is a good choice. I mean,
wow, I thought you'd give me a hard time.
It's probably one of the oldest board games ever played, so I think it totally fits in there.
But you're not going to pick it. What is your second choice, sir? What is your second ballot pick?
It's definitely your choices are classier than mine because my second pick is Masters of the Universe.
Okay.
It was just another big, huge part of my childhood. For me, it's something that, interestingly, the show does not hold up very well.
Oh, really? I haven't watched it. I've thought about going back to watching it, but it's not good is what you're saying.
The animation's fine, but the context is bizarre.
Oh, okay.
And it's just, the voice acting is not very good. And it's just like, I don't know if you can describe a show as wonky, it's wonky.
I think you just did, so I think it works.
But as far as when I was a kid, like getting Castle Grayskull, that's something that you couldn't just buy. You had to ask for that was a big gift because those are expensive. Getting a battle cat with the actual felt skin, they didn't have toys like that. And then you had to buy the battle armor separately and all these things and She-Ra is coming back to Netflix as a new show, which is exciting.
Well, exciting depending on who you talk to.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We're not going to get into that.
People don't like it. Also, the same people who told Captain Marvel she should be smiling on the cover of her poster.
And why is Captain Marvel a girl? That was my favorite one.
I hate the internet. But yeah, I think it's just classic. It's one of those, if you ask people 80s TV shows, what cartoons were you watching in the 80s? It's almost always someone says, Masters of the Universe, because it was just hugely popular. And yeah, Skeletor, one of the all-time best villains.
Yeah, he was a good villain.
Yeah. So I just have an affinity for the show. And the toys, man, those toys all the time. That's what I wanted. I want my He-Man toys.
The only He-Man toy I really remember is, oh man, was it Orko? Was that the wizard?
Yeah.
And you could and he spun. We really need to do videos at some point because your cat is hilarious. But that was the one toy I always remembered, that he had a hard plastic body and his arms could move up and down, but he had a little spindle underneath him that he would spin around when you kind of twisted him up, which I always thought was really cool. So Orko was the one He-Man toy that I really remember, other than He-Man getting his real battle damage, that where his center chest thing would get more damaged if you poked at it. And that was pretty cool. So
yes, sorry. Being distracted.
Oh man, awesome. All right, so my third vote is again going to be, well, I shouldn't say again because I thought you were going to ridicule me for Tic-Tac-Toe. You are going to ridicule me for this one, though, because you've already made fun of it. And my third vote is for chalk. And the reason my third vote is for chalk is because chalk is, number one, something that lets people and kids unleash their creativity. They're able to take some chalk, make beautiful sidewalk art. They're really able to express themselves in ways that you can't in many other games because of rules and guidelines and all of those things that we have, which is why I think chalk is so important. The other reason I would vote for chalk is because it's the great enabler. Chalk allows you to play a whole lot of other games. You can make hopscotch. You can make Foursquare. You can make a ton of things with chalk. So I think that would be the reason that I would vote for chalk. Not only the ability to have something creative that I think is important to have in the Hall of Fame, but it enables you to do so many other things just because it exists. So that's my third vote, chalk.
It's I did make fun of it, but it's you made a good case for it.
I try.
For me, like I see what you're saying. I guess when I take it for its face value at the National Toy Hall of Fame, they're just things I didn't think of as being toys, but they definitely qualify.
Nope, I totally agree. It definitely always, when I see the list, it's like, that's interesting. But when you really think about it contextually, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense for sure. Chutes and Ladders or Tickle Me Elmo. Like Tickle Me Elmo was like a craze, and I have one in my house. But I think Chutes and Ladders would be great. It's such an old classic game, and it's like one of the first games people reference as like a board game, like a family board game. Because I guess like Tic-Tac-Toe and like chess would be like games of strategy more than playtime games.
Right.
So I think like Chutes and Ladders and Candyland, those are like the OG like board games. And it's definitely something I think most kids have played. Maybe that's a unfair generalization, but definitely something that I played and was introduced to as a child very early. Like probably 5 years old or so, maybe older. I think it's just a classic, something that people can relate to, and it's Chutes and Ladders. I mean, it makes sense the way that the game is played. Mm-hmm. You have your positive and negative right in the title of the game. Very rarely, I think, is a shoot a good thing on the game. I think they're all bad. I think they all go down.
Right. Well, but going down chutes was fun as a kid, right?
For sure.
Way better than climbing up the ladder.
Yes. Going up ladders is not fun. But yeah, I mean, I would throw that in there too. I mean, I think everything that is listed has its own merits, and I think, except for I don't know what Fisher-Price corn popper is, unless it's the popcorn machine.
Is that the thing? Okay, I don't know, and I probably should have looked this up. Is that the kid's toy where when you push it on the ground, it pops up the balls? That's what I feel like it's got to be. You know what I'm talking about when I say that, or do I sound?
Oh, like the vacuum.
Yeah where you push it and it pops the things up. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. Now I know what it is.
Not a hot air popcorn popper.
I didn't know what it was. It says like corn popper. What a misleading title. There's no corn in there.
True. Very true.
It's just balls.
Well, I don't think they wanted to name it the Fisher-Price ball popper.
Yeah, I guess that's less appealing.
So, all right. I think the one thing do you watch the Great British Baking Show?
I don't. I keep seeing it on my Netflix, though.
Yeah. So they just recently released the newest season, which was, they're always a season behind. So it was a season from 2017. And in episode, I don't know, 3 maybe of the season that's on Netflix now, for their Showstopper Challenge, which is the last challenge they do before somebody gets sent home each week. They had to use biscuits, and now we're talking like British biscuits, not Southern American biscuits, but British biscuits, so thinner, harder, crunchier, to make board games.
Oh.
So, and they had to be able to play the board games. And multiple people made basically from Snakes and Ladders. So I think just seeing how universal that game is, like that when game show contestants were like, hey, you have to make a board game out of biscuits, that is what they went to. I think it was biscuits. Correct me if I'm wrong if you're a listener. I can't remember what exactly it was. I think it was biscuits. But anyway, So there you go. So, hey, that's the board game news. Let's slide on over to some video game news for the last couple of weeks. And this one I think is pretty interesting. Some football, or soccer for us uncultured Americans, fans decided they wanted to protest esports. So they threw tennis balls and controllers onto the pitch in a match between Young Boys and Basel at the Stade de Suisse in Switzerland. They even unfurled a large banner with a pause button on it in the stands. The match was held up for a few minutes while the field was picked up, and apparently it's becoming more popular for European football clubs to sponsor esports teams or players, especially those who participate in FIFA. And some purist fans are not taking too kindly to it. So, as far as protests go, Josh, was this effective? And do you think this will cause any owners or those interested in investing in esports to take notice?
Well, certainly people took notice. That for sure happened. I was very surprised to see it. However, soccer, we'll call them hooligans, have a reputation where if they don't like something, they very quickly and easily gang up and become like majority mob rule kind of thing. Is it threatening to soccer? No, I don't get why they care so much. I mean, video games are becoming very divisive topics in the country, in our country. So I don't know what it's like in the UK, or in Europe in general. Sorry.
Yeah, this was in Switzerland. This happened
in Europe. It was just very surprising for me to read because I didn't see the correlation. I don't understand how they got to there. Like, why care? But I guess if you're going to protest, that's one way to do it, right? Expletive esports on your own PlayStation controller.
Right, or you had to go out and buy one if you don't own one, which is PlayStation's like great.
Like, so I don't understand the logic behind it. But yes, ownership groups will take notice. Will they do anything? I don't know that they have to. I think if it continues to happen, the smarter thing to do is just change venues than it is to confront a group of people like that.
Well, I think it's really interesting because do they assume, is the assumption that since, teams that in this group, I think the Young Boys ownership doesn't invest or have any holdings in esports, but Basel, the other team, does. Do they think that because they're investing in esports, then they're not investing like in the pro sports team?
I think, yeah, I mean, it's without knowing anything as a person who doesn't know. I mean, it's a logical jump to make. It doesn't mean they're right.
Right.
But I'm not concerned about Bob Kraft owning an esports team taking money away from the Patriots. Like, he has a lot of money. He's a smart investor. I would assume any owner of a football club in Europe would also be a smart investor. But I think it's fair for them to be worried without knowing. But the way that they reacted was not the way I would approve.
Right. I just think it's so odd. Like, if you're upset about them owning, having standings in esports, of all the things to protest, it just seems odd to me. But I guess if you're, I'm also, maybe in my life, I'm not passionate enough about anything to get that mad if, PlayStation suddenly bought a baseball team. Would I get, really upset about it? I don't think so. Maybe I would. Maybe I'd be like, oh, there goes all the money for the first party studios. We're never going to get God of War 2 or Spider-Man 2. I don't know. But I just thought it was such an odd story because, I feel like it would literally be going to a basketball game to protest the team, owning stock in a a bass fishing, group. It just seems
not even close to the sport.
Right. It just seems such an odd way to express your displeasure. But I mean, they have their rights to, I guess. I think it's always bad when they do things that stop a game. I think at that point you don't have a right to do that anymore. But I think, having
I
some.
guess we didn't ask what game they were playing. Maybe they were playing FIFA.
Yeah, on the field instead.
Yeah, maybe they were playing electronic football instead of real football.
Yeah,
Maybe that's why they.
That could
I think
be.
that's more warranted.
Yeah, for sure.
Random than if it was like Overwatch, like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, like I said, the one team, the home team where they were processing, like doesn't even have any vestige in esports, and I think the other team sponsored FIFA players. So that's like, so it's just very, it is an odd story of the week that I thought was interesting to talk about. The other thing, while the previous story was odd news, in not surprising news, people really like Fortnite. So much so that August was actually the highest player count for a single month for Fortnite ever, at 78.3 million players. Now, obviously, there's been a whirlwind of fervor around this game. There's console bundles for PlayStation and for Nintendo Switch. Ninja's been on the cover of ESPN the magazine, which you can hear us talk about on the PSVG flagship show that Josh and I were just on. Athletes are doing the dances when they score from Fortnite. But the one thing I've heard multiple times lately, and I want to get your take on this, Josh, was that Fortnite has hit its peak. That this is it. That Fortnite hype is about to go downhill. What say you? Has Fortnite reached critical mass, and is this the best it's going to be for them moving forward?
Well, I mean, it has to hit a peak at some point, right? It will have to go down at some point. If there is a time that seems the most challenging to Fortnite, it would be now, with all these games coming out with their own Battle Royale modes. Maybe Call of Duty is the game to do that. Maybe Battlefield 5 is the game to do that. Maybe, the combo of both of those games taking players away from Fortnite. I think the thing that I can't wrap my head around is 78.3 million. I wonder how many people of those have battle passes, and how much, and you have to get a new battle pass every season, unless you're unlocking.
Right, unless you play enough to earn it. Yep.
I just can't get my head around how much money they're making. And I'm wondering how many are mobile players, because I think a lot of times when games hit mobile, the player counts go way, way, way up.
Right.
Because you're now accessible to everybody. But yeah, if this is their challenge, right? I think if they can weather from now until February and stay on top, I think they'll be on top for a long time after that. Because right now, I think we only have foresight of Call of Duty and Battlefield. We don't know what else is coming, but I'm telling you, if someone makes a Hunger Games video game, everyone's in trouble. Because if they get that license, why play any other game and play the game it's based off of? Well, Battle Royale, I guess, is the game it's based off of.
Right.
But I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think that 78.3 million is a lot. I will say I felt like I hadn't been hearing as much about Fortnite just in the wind, if you would, like when I was looking online or when I was on Twitter or just in general in passing. My coworkers weren't talking to me about it as much because that's the big thing. Folks in my office know I'm the gamer. So like folks will ask me about it, and like a lot of people asking what they can get their kids so that they can play Fortnite and things like that. And that hasn't happened as much recently. But when I go in to prepare show notes for, this show or anything that I'm looking at, like when I actually go read the news, 6 of the top 10 stories are all Fortnite related still. It's very prevalent still when you really get in there. So maybe it's at the point now where enough people know about it that it's not so much people finding out anymore. It's just people now participating in it. And 78.3 million is a ton. I feel like it's maybe starting to crest. Like, I don't know how much bigger it's going to get. But I think, like you said, I do think it's going to sustain. I do think it's probably going to see a bit of a drop in October when Call of Duty comes out. And then maybe in November when Battlefield 5 comes up, unless all the rumors about Battlefield are true. And maybe it's not selling as well or looking to sell as well. I think it'll be interesting to see there. I think, we all kind of have, quote unquote, forgotten about PUBG, but PUBG still gets, a ton of players, even though we're not talking about it as much. I think it was the first game to average like 1 million players for 12 months consecutively on Steam or whatever it was. I don't know exactly what that stat was. It was the first one to do something similar to that. I think until like August of this year or something like that. So PUBG's still doing really, really well. But when you see streamers like, Dr. Disrespect playing Blackout for a week when it was during the beta and things like that, I don't know if Ninja ever jumped over. I have no idea, but I know,
so.
Yeah, but I know like a lot of even like the Overwatch streamers I follow were playing Blackout. I think there's the possibility that Call of Duty might temper this a little bit, but I don't know if it is definitely going to start the downfall. But I think maybe they're starting to crest. Like maybe they're hitting what their big number is going to be, but I think they're probably still pretty happy with what their big number is.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's definitely an interesting time for Fortnite and to watch what's going on with it. I mean, they're only teasing season 6, I think, is coming out. So as far as that goes, it seems pretty early in the lifespan for Fortnite. So I think they get a long ways to go.
I agree. And I think it's interesting because I think that the Battle Royale version of Fortnite, or the Battle Royale mode, didn't release until September of last year, right? So it's been basically a year at this point that this game has been out for this mode. Because obviously the Defend the World part came in July or whatever of 2017. And Battle Royale came later. It's really interesting to see how much this, games like Trump, when they hit like 1, 2, PlayStation was talking about how Spider-Man. Yeah, we talked about Spider-Man, Donnie. Spider-Man hit 3.3 million sales in the first 3 days. This is 78.3 million. Like, it's just, those are huge numbers. That's just ridiculous numbers, especially to attain that in 1 year. So, all right. Well, hey, that's it for the news that we're going to cover this week. Time for us to slide on over and talk about our topic of the show, which really is just going to be continuing a conversation. Like I said, moving more towards that conversational podcast that we're going for. But tonight we want to talk about game reviews, and that game reviews have traditionally had scores associated with them. In the current state of video games, the scale basically seems to be 7 is bad and 10 is good. Most sites will say that they have a 1 to 10 scale or whatever, but I feel like very rarely do we see games get below a 7 these days that are coming out of major studios. And most people seem to feel like they don't have time for games that score a 7 or a 7.5 or, even close to an 8, even though on all those scales, a 7 is good. People associate 7 with not being good. But anyway, enough of that soapbox. That's the current scale. Board game reviewers don't tend to assign specific scores to games for most of them that I've seen. That they talk about what they like, if they approve of it, if they recommend it, but you don't see board game reviewers very often putting scores on games. However, on Board Game Geek, you definitely see people scoring games, and that a lot of reviewers will even score games there, but not necessarily in their reviews. So you see a lot of people scoring games, talking about how good the game is through that number. So, Josh, the question that has raged on for a long time, but we're finally going to debate on this show. Is it fair to judge an entire game and boil it down to a score?
Yes.
Well, that was a great debate. Thanks for being here, everybody.
I don't know that it's necessarily fair, but it's something that has been happening forever. If it depends on like where you look, because a lot of places, not a lot of places, some places will break down a game based on sound, visuals. They break it down into different portions of the game. I think that's more fair because you could, let's take Tomb Raider for an example. You could take Tomb Raider and let's take Spider-Man for an example because Donnie. You take Spider-Man and you have graphics, you have story, you have audio, you have controls, and then you have like world design. I would say could be a category. If you're taking those individually and scoring them, that's fair. I think the problem becomes when you try to take everything and put it into one. So like if you kind of look at the Tomb Raider Metacritic score, someone gave it a 40, and based on the review, you can tell it wasn't a thought out review of the game compared to someone giving it a 90. That affects that full sum of all those reviews to be less positive, as if like Spider-Man, you're like, so like, say someone who doesn't like comics just didn't love the Spider-Man story, but everything else about the game they really thought was great. Or say someone's thought like the graphics were like last gen, and they were like, oh, I'm going to give it a 5 in graphics, but I'm going to give it a 9 in story. I think if I read a review and those are individually out there and your thought behind why is in there, that's totally fair to do. But you're right. I think it might not be fair to sum the entirety of the game based on one score, because a lot of times every game has a different group of people working on different parts of the game as well. So you have all these different hands in it as well.
Right. So a few questions for you. Number one. So you said breaking things down into like graphics, gameplay, sound, etc. If you score things individually based on that you're totally fine with scores from that perspective.
Sure.
How do you assure that an 8 in graphics is equivalent to an 8 in sound? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, how do you ensure that those scales are equal when they're trying to measure or you're trying to grade such disparate things?
They can't be equal to each other. They just have to be equal to the scale. So if you're saying an 8 for sound, you need to have a scale. What is a 10? What has been a 10? What's a 1? Like, people don't have examples of scores anymore. If someone gives a game a 10, what's an 11? Why did you give it a 10? You're telling me they didn't miss anything? This is a perfect score for this? Like, well,
most sites will say that like a 10, if it's a 10, that just means like, I think IGN uses the word masterpiece. Doesn't mean it's perfect. Doesn't mean there's not any issues. It just means it's a masterpiece.
Well, then the scale should be different because 10 is the top of the scale, in my opinion.
Okay.
And that's just so like in sound and graphics, you can't compare them. But even in an entirety of a rating, I still don't think it's fair to clump them together. That being said, I do appreciate and understand that sound does improve parts of movies and games on its own, which can make graphics seem better because the sound is better. I get that that's something that happens. I just don't think that there's a way to quantify that.
Okay, so if you take the time to then break down a scale for sound, a scale for graphics, a scale for gameplay, a scale for all of those things, when you then go in your review and say sound gets an 8, graphics gets a 9, gameplay gets a 3, are you putting what that means next to each one so that they know exactly? Are you putting the reason why or what that means on the scale? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you define like why you gave that score? If
you're giving something a 3, I think, or a 10, I think you need to say why you're doing it, not just give it that score. Which is kind of why I really enjoy audio reviews now, or video reviews, because you can it's a lot easier to take someone as what they're saying instead of like trying to read the way they think, which is also another problem with like written reviews. I really wish I remembered the name of one of the review sites I watch. Maybe the listeners know, but it's a guy who he does his reviews the way I'm talking. Like, he does graphics and then he does sound, but then he goes, all right, I'm just going to shut up now and you can listen. So then you listen to him play for 5 minutes to hear what he just said about the sound, and see if you hear the same thing. I think that's important. I like that he does that. And they'll go into story without spoilers and review that portion. It's the guy who does buy, rent, or pass.
Oh, yeah. I can't remember the name, but I know what you're talking about, yeah.
So, or buy, rent, or wait, or something like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's just what I think I would like to see in a review. We all know that that's not really what happens. You just get an overall score from pretty much everybody.
Right.
But I would love to see someone. The problem is you're not going to get someone like a PSVG person who's not getting paid to do it typically find that much time to do something like that.
Right.
Which is another problem with the reviewing process. Like, if you have a lot of people that are not getting paid to do reviews, so you know, that's why I think a lot of times you see varying review quality as well. Not that our quality differs, I don't think, but I can definitely see that happening with people like a shamed IGN reviewer. He clearly didn't have enough time to do his review. But he was getting paid.
He was getting, yes, he was.
So, yeah, that's what I think. I don't know. What do you think on the topic?
So I am not a fan of review scores at all. I think that review scores as a whole I personally think are actually a bad thing. I would prefer that the industry completely moved away from scoring games. And I know realistically that's probably not going to happen. It's convenient. People like to be able to scroll down to the bottom of an article or look at an article really quickly and see, what that snapshot is, what that brief overview of, what score for a game is. And that tells them right away, oh, this game is okay, or it's good, or it's bad, or it's great. The reason I don't like them is because I definitely think about video games very much as art. And I think that they are way too complicated to boil them down to a single score. I think you could have potentially a summary paragraph that says, here are all the things that I think are wonderful about this game, and here are the things that I think are not so wonderful about this game. Or here are why we would recommend this game, or who we would recommend this game for, or who maybe might not get into this game as much. But I think the idea of assigning numbers to them, to me, seems a bit antiquated, honestly, and I don't think it fits with the medium anymore. Because I think games are so complicated and complex and intricate that in a lot of ways, just assigning a score to something, to me, seems almost like a disservice to the game. And I'm not saying, people are going to say, like, you're making this comparison, I'm not saying that the quality of video games is equivalent to fine art, but I would think most people, and that doesn't make it right or wrong, but I think a lot of people, if you said, okay, go into a gallery and rate every painting from 1 to 10.
Right.
Like, that just seems silly, kind of, right? Like, you like it or you don't. You look at it, you're like, this speaks to me. I enjoy this. I really like the color or the use of space or the framing in this piece of art. Like, that's what you do. And I feel like we should be doing the same things with video games, of talking about what we like specifically, what works for us when we're reviewing games, and then also the things that detract from the piece for us. And I think approaching it from that perspective, to me, would be far more valuable to giving video games the reputation they're looking for, to be taken more seriously, to have people look at the medium not just as either Super Mario Brothers or Call of Duty, which I think right now we still get a lot of that. So I think it would help push the medium forward as art. I'm not a fan of it. And I think also having the ability to not putting numbers on it, I think, is also important, because I think reviews should be updated, and they're not right now. Like, when you review a game, or when you're looking at a review for a game, it should be based off the game you're buying today, not the game when it came out a year ago, because that game doesn't exist anymore. That, unless nothing has changed, which maybe it hasn't, but with the day of patches and add-ons and everything else, if I go buy Destiny 2 today, it is a very different game than when I bought Destiny 2 a year ago. If I go and buy, any game that has game-breaking bugs that 6 months later just gets patched, those games should be re-reviewed. And I think when you assign a number to it, it makes it far more difficult to do that.
So let me ask you a question. We have to review Hover.
We do have to review Hover. You'll hear that. We'll talk about it next week.
Are we going to give it a score?
I'm not planning to give it a score. Are you?
I'm on board if we don't.
Okay.
We'll be the first in PSVG history.
Yeah, I'm on board with not giving a score. I'm happy to talk about the things that I like and appeal to me about it, and the things that I found to detract.
Sorry, Donnie.
Well, and here's my other question. Obviously, we're talking about this mostly in the context of video games, but for board games, for your favorite board game reviewers, how many of them assign scores to the games in the videos or the reviews that you read?
Yeah, none of them. If you watch Dice Tower review at the end of the week, they do score every game they review.
Right, but when you're actually watching the review itself,
they don't show the score.
Exactly. And does that seem odd to you? Do you feel like that board game should be handled differently than video games?
I don't think it seems odd to me, because it's a normal thing for me as a video game hobbyist. Way to class that up, Josh. But I think they are not obligated to. It's a different medium.
Right.
If they don't want to give it a score, they certainly don't have to. And what I like about Dice Tower, when I don't typically watch the weekend review, because I'll watch the reviews, and I just go based off of, like, I know who I like. Tom Vassell and Z Garcia, those are the guys that like the same games that I like. So if I see them like or review a game, I know I'll probably like that game. But that takes time too. Like you need to find out who is like-minded with you.
So what you're saying is you're a big fan of Neuroshima Hex.
I haven't played it, but I'd be willing to try it though. It looks very interesting.
It does. It looks awesome. I agree.
So, but like Tom's top like 3 games, I think. At least Gloomhaven we agree on. I just haven't played his other favorite games, but they're games that I want to.
Right. And I think that's the thing is that when we look at, board game reviews, they talk about quality of the components, quality of the graphic design, oddly enough, obviously, which wouldn't necessarily apply to video games so much, but they talk about how good is the rule book, which I guess you could talk about the tutorial in a video game, like how good are all those things? And they talk about those like within context of the greater item. And then they talk about whether this greater item is is it a good game or not? And I think that it helps much more to know what you liked or why you liked or what you didn't like and why you didn't like it, and helping me decide whether or not I'm interested in a game. A score doesn't tell me that. A score is fodder for me to argue about. A score is for me to go to Metacritic and say, oh, look, X game is rated higher than Y game, so X game must be a better game. But does it have to mean that? Is that actually what that means?
Right. No, I don't. I thought that was no. I don't know. I like to look at Metacritic for a general idea of something, but it's not. Well, I shouldn't say it won't affect my decision to get a game. If there's something that I absolutely know I have to play, I will still get it.
Right.
Mass Effect Andromeda is like an example of that.
Yep. I still never got my phone call about that, by the way.
Yeah, well, you'll get it someday. But like, we saw the review scores coming out, and I think I was just in denial. I was like, oh, so some people don't like it or whatever. And there was obviously controversy about the game before it came out, and that affects review scores.
Right.
So I think that if it was a game that I wasn't passionate about, like this random new game comes out tomorrow that I didn't hear of, but it scores at 98, will I check it out? Yeah. I might not buy it, but I'll definitely look it up. That's how I end up with games like Dead Cells or Celeste or the game Donnie's talking about now that's on Switch. But that's more word of mouth than it is high scores.
Right. I do think there is something potentially to be said for smaller games. A game like Celeste that scored really well and kind of surprised people that brought out there, and seeing that game get talked about in the way it did. But you're right. It's interesting. If there wasn't a score attached to it, would Celeste still have been caught as fire as much as it did? And I think almost on the flip side, for better or for worse, like when a game is expected to be good and then it is, I feel like it's almost in some ways worse for that. And I shouldn't say worse, less helpful to that game. Like Forza Horizon 4, reviews came out, they are stellar, but everyone expected them to be, right?
Right.
Because they've made 3 great games before it. I'm assuming Playgrounds made the previous 3. I have no idea.
Yeah.
So, it's like, hey, look, they hit another home run. Nice work. Now let's move on to the next thing. Like, I feel like it's not getting the hype that it probably should deserve of like, hey, there's this really great game coming out. But everyone's like, well, yeah, we expected it to be great.
Yeah. No, you're right. I agree with that.
All right. So we need to make a decision now, Josh, for the rest of eternity for Bored with Video Games that we can never, ever change.
Okay.
And we talked about it briefly already, and I said, well, I don't know. I wasn't planning on it. Are we going to score games when we review games officially?
No, let's not do that.
Okay.
Let's give them recommendations or non-recommendations.
So here, dear listener, here's what I ask of you. If you have ideas of things that would be helpful or a way that would be helpful for us to review games, do we recommend? Do we not recommend? What sort of system outside of scores would be helpful for you when we talk about games? Let us know. Hit us up at BoredWithVG on Twitter, on Instagram. Send us an email, boredwithvg@gmail.com. Let us know what would be helpful for you when we're talking about board games and video games when we're reviewing them. What kind of system would you like to see that isn't based on numbers? So, Josh, we're getting close to the end here.
Mm-hmm.
We had one question that came in via Twitter from none other than Playing Nintendo himself. Do you have his tweet up by chance?
I don't, but I'm pretty sure I remember what he said.
I think you should cover this because I think this is a very critical question.
Yeah, so Mr. Play Nintendo, Mr. Donnie Reece said, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the tweet in front of me, but he said, when will Bored with Video Games eventually become the Spider-Cast? And he's obviously referring to us talking about Spider-Man for one episode? Maybe
two. I think we talked about it for 2. And now we talked about it multiple times today. So it really has been 3 weeks in a row. We've talked about Spider-Man.
3 episodes now. I dragged Donnie through the mud on Discord for taking some quotes and basically TMZing him from a Flux Depose episode where he said Spider-Man looks like a game that was last gen, and he got a little bit of grief, but not as much as I was hoping for. But Donnie did turn around. I can vouch for that. I know that Donnie really ended up enjoying it, and
He did.
like Kyle, he also finished Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the answer to that question is when more Spider-Man games come out, we'll have to consider messaging Insomniac and say, hey, you got a Spider-Cast? Where are your guys? We already had someone ask us to do it.
And we will be doing PSXP will be coming out shortly here. We're recording this week, and we are going to be all talking about Spider-Man. So.
Oh, yeah, I don't want to step on PSXP then. No.
Yeah, so that will be coming out. That'll be recorded this week. Actually, it'll be recorded tonight. If you listen to this on Thursday, it'll be recorded tonight. And then that will be out next week for us to talk all about Spider-Man, and it will be grand. So yeah, looking forward to that. Maybe the Spider-Cast in the future, but 3 years or so probably until we get the next Spider-Man game. So it might be
so long.
I know, but really, if you think about it, I mean, granted, I'm not saying it's as detailed as, I'm not saying it's as good as, or anything like that. It's been a long time since between Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2. Just saying.
That's very true. Very true.
A lot more than 3 years. All right. Well, hey, as I promised, there is going to be one final news segment that we're going to add to the end of the podcast, and we hope that you enjoy it. And this is something, listener, if you want to give a suggestion to this that you want included, we want to hear what suggestions that you have. And suggestions for what, you might be saying, Kyle. That is suggestions for a well-rounded life. That's right. We are clearly a gaming podcast, but we want to give you one recommendation, suggestion, or thing that we're into that is helping us live a well-rounded life that includes things that are not just games. So this will likely not be anything game-related, like I said, but it's just something that we feel is currently giving our life meaning, currently help balancing us out in all of these good things. So if you want to give us a suggestion for a well-rounded life, I would actually ask, this would be way easier if you send them to the email, boredwithvg@gmail.com, so we can keep track easier of which ones we say. So hit us up, boredwithvg@gmail.com, to talk about what you want to recommend to people to live a well-rounded life. And with that, Josh, what is your recommendation for our fellow listener?
Well, I want to say I'm glad that you said something different, because what you wrote was, this will be something that is related to games. And I was like, what?
Yeah, sorry. I was doing notes really fast today. Not related to games. Not related to games.
What advice can I give that's related to games? So actually, this is something I was thinking about the other day, coincidentally. And today, my day today kind of rolls into that. So my wife has a stomach virus. She was very sick the other day, Monday night, or Sunday night? Yeah, Sunday night into Monday. So she went to urgent care. She knew it was going to be a rough go for a little while. So I offered to take a sick day for myself today to stay home, take care of her when she needed it, and to take the kid off of her hands, take care of the little guy for the whole day. So my advice is, do things for other people. It sounds easy, but go out of your way to do things for other people. If it's helping a friend move, that a lot of people are like, I really have no desire to help anyone move, which is, I don't want to help anyone move because that stinks.
Moving is the worst thing ever.
Yeah, but do it.
Yes.
If your friend asks you to help them move, you do it, because you are strengthening your friendship. You're making a better bond with your friends, and not just the friend you're helping move, but everyone else who is also begrudgingly there. But do things that are out of your comfort zone and help people out. Something my uncle did before he passed was he was very much living that life where he didn't ask for favors back. So we were behind on our excise tax on our cars, and we hadn't paid him, and he was down at City Hall paying his, and we have the same last name. So he found out we all had excise tax overdue. So he paid our excise tax, and he just said, I don't want you to pay me back. I want you to do something for your cousins or your brother or your aunt or your parents that they don't ask you to do. Just do that for them. So do something nice for someone that doesn't expect it. Help out when someone asks you to help. I gave up a Saturday and a Sunday just about a week ago to help someone move on Saturday and help my brother pick up a pool table on Sunday. Both of those were no fun. But I was an extra hand. I was helpful, hopefully, and I felt good about it afterwards. So that's what I would recommend. Open yourself up.
So, quick question about the moving thing. Did you at least get pizza out of the deal?
No, he offered pizza and board games and beer.
Mm-hmm.
But it was we were helping him move at 3:30 in the afternoon, and I have a kid at home. Like I can't do that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I hear you.
Which is a bummer. If it was like a 10 o'clock move, and then lunch and a beer and a board game at noon or 3,
right,
perfect.
Right.
But he did offer.
That's very.
I just couldn't take him up on the offer.
Gotcha. Awesome. So Josh is very much about helping you be a nice, great person. Mine is super selfish, but it's something that I find to be very important to me. I'm going to say, go to a concert. That's my advice, is go to a concert. 2 weekends ago, I went to a concert, and when I was much, much younger, back in my college days, when a lot of my other friends were out spending their money on irresponsible choices, I was the really cool kid who spent all of my extra money on going to concerts. Multiple times a week, I was driving to the Twin Cities because I went to school about a little over an hour north of there. I would drive down to the Twin Cities multiple times a week to go see different shows. I really wanted to work in the music industry at the time. I saw literally hundreds and hundreds of bands. I had a list at one point, live in concert. It was the thing I did. And then I moved to North Dakota, and now I live in the middle of Iowa. So it's not something that I get to do very often anymore. However, 2 weekends ago, I went to a concert, and it was a reunion of one of my favorite bands of all time. The band Live is from the 90s, is back on tour together with the original lineup, with Counting Crows. Nice. And it was an exceptional show. And I am so glad I went. And I think just my advice specifically is go to a concert. But if it's maybe not a concert that gives that feeling to you, find that thing, and make sure you treat yourself to that every once in a while, because it's important. It's important to treat yourself from time to time with the things that you really enjoy and that you're passionate about, and that get you out and doing things and experiencing life in a really fun way. So that's my advice. My suggestion, go to a concert. Josh, what do you say we wrap up this show?
That sounds like a great idea. Throwing Copper must be 20 years old now, right?
Yeah, I think it was 94 or 96. So, yeah,
Wow.
I know.
Good times. Okay, thanks for joining us, everyone. Remember, you can find us on social media at BoardWithVG. Use the hashtag BoardWithVG. You can find us on Facebook.com/BoardWithVG and BoardWithVG@gmail.com. Soon to be searchable in Apple for iTunes. For podcasts, you can soon be searching Board with Video Games in your podcast feed, which is very exciting. You can find me, Joshy B, on Xbox and PlayStation as Why So Serious. That's SIRRIUS. You can find me on Switch somehow, some way. If you want it, you can get it. And Steam, I'm not going to plug it. I haven't been playing games on my computer in months. It's a wise decision for me to buy a new computer. Kyle, where can they find you?
Really quickly before I give you that information,
Yes.
How did you do? Were you victorious in the Tecmo tournament?
No.
No? Okay.
Jason, Lacey, and I, we had an interception off. And then I could have kicked a field goal to tie it with like 12 seconds left in the fourth quarter. But the whole game, my kick was off. I kept trying to do maximizing kicks, and every time I did it, it would be the shortest kick you could kick.
Oh, no.
So I totally missed the field goal at the end of the game, and it was only from like the 30-yard line too. So.
As a Vikings fan, I can identify with what that must be like. Also, as a side note, Throwing Copper came out in 1994. So anyway, but you can find me all the places at Psychocross, CYCOCROSS. That is on PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, Twitter, Instagram, Board Game Geek, all of those places. As always, if you have suggestions for future topics or suggestions for the well-rounded life, hit us up on social media. Hit us up at BoardWithVG on Twitter. Send us emails to boardwithvg@gmail.com because we want to talk about what you want to hear about. And remember, everyone, whether it be board games or video games, never stop gaming.